The main thing that characterizes NPC behavior and NPC ideas is how algorithmic and predictable it is. That is, of course, what makes the meme so funny. And it also invites the question, what is that algorithm that these behaviors are based upon? I'm sure you've seen many examples of hypocrisy and intellectual inconsistency from NPC types. Hypocrisy is aesthetically unpleasant, but primarily it's evidence that the ideas or behaviors are not based on any rational principles. So we can safely assume that NPC ideas and behaviors are based on something else. Obviously, there must be some sort of emotional motivation. You can clearly see how emotional their responses can be. I think NPC ideologies originate from a serious fundamental error, and that is the certainty that the NPC is a good person. I think it's probably very common for children to assume that they are good people, but I think it's something that most people grow out of and should grow out of. But it's different for NPCs. Not only do they fail to grow out of this assumption, they grow more and more certain of it. When someone holds the belief that he or she is a good person and then commits a bad or irresponsible behavior, that becomes evidence against that belief. This evidence can be interpreted in different ways. It could be, I guess I'm not as good as I thought, or something to that effect. And I think this is a healthy response. It may lead to taking responsibility and therefore making positive change. But that can be a painful thing to go through. It's a challenge to one's self-worth. It's a challenge to one's identity, to one's perception of the world and himself. It can be a very painful process to take responsibility for one's actions. It's like grieving the death of your former self. So I think we can all understand why NPCs avoid that process. The NPC takes the other route, which is to rationalize and justify the behavior, to avoid challenging the assumption that the NPC is a good person. And I think that is a fundamental mistake that a lot of people make, especially when they're young. And that fundamental mistake can lead into the NPC algorithm. Before I describe the NPC algorithm, I'm going to describe what I call the irresponsibility feedback loop. We all have biological drives that motivate us to do irresponsible things. And when we rationalize and justify these behaviors, we reinforce the motivations and behaviors. And that leads to repetitions of the motivations and behaviors. That leads us to reinforcing the rationalization and the justification. and around it goes. And the longer it goes on, the harder it becomes to break out of this cycle, because it reinforces itself continually, kind of like an addiction. Now imagine taking it a step further and creating a system of ethics around this irresponsibility loop. You are a good person, your behaviors are justified, and therefore your behaviors are ethical. You may now universalize the behaviors, the motivations, into a system of ethics, which may thereby reinforce the irresponsibility loop and the belief that you are a good person. And this becomes another feedback loop. A feedback loop inside a feedback loop. You can convince yourself that your behaviors aren't just justifiable, they're ethical, because you're a good person. This, I think, is the core of the NPC algorithm. Now I'm going to describe an element which I think provides a lot of context to this theory. Something that I think is strange and stupid about our culture is the emphasis we put on happiness. It seems to be a commonly held belief that happiness is a natural state or a primary purpose in life. But it seems clear to me that happiness is temporary. And most people are unhappy most of the time. But our culture gives us the impression that that is a problem. A serious problem. On top of that, we're in a really unique position historically. For most of human history, people have had good reasons to be unhappy. In our modern, affluent society, we don't always have good reasons to be unhappy, or at least not ones that are easily identifiable. We live in comfortable, climate-controlled environments. We have plenty of food to eat. Early and tragic deaths are relatively uncommon. Yet we're still unhappy. We're still unsatisfied. We still think something needs to change. And for the NPC, it's clearly not the NPC that needs to change. The NPC is a good person. He's certain of that. It's the world, or the environment, or some other people that have to change for the NPC to be happy. It probably has something to do with all those awful people who are judging me for my behavior, making me feel bad about it. Well, that's just bigoted. I'm a good person, and I'm not getting what I'm owed. The world is clearly unfair.